Young and my colleagues here at the Faculty of the Built Environment, uh, University of Technology, Jamaica. Thank you for organizing this very, what I consider impromptu but necessary conference, and for us to be participating in the global debate on this pandemic. My presentation is titled Pandemics and the City, which would indicate that the experience that we're having is not new. For my presentation, I will make some assumptions regarding past, present, and future pandemics and the city. I will focus on the relationship between density, connectivity, and the pandemics that we have experienced over time. I'm positing that not all densities are created equal. Some densities are better than some, and we will look at the experience in cities, not just here in Jamaica and the Caribbean, but elsewhere in the world. I'll also concentrate on limitations of current density for us in Jamaica and small island states, and in terms of a response to the pandemic and the issues associated with density, the role of urban management to address future pandemics. If we're to look at the role of urban management, then certainly we need to focus on the persons who are responsible for urban management. And those individuals are urban planners and land use managers. So the question is, what do we now need to do going forward? And I will end by positing way forward for retooling and retraining land managers to address future pandemics in the city. Data from Ministry of Health shows that the spread of COVID-19 is concentrated in more urbanized area. The management of urban spaces should also be deliberated in terms of the spread of this virus. So it's not just a question that it is concentrated in urbanized area, but how do we then manage urbanized area to address the issues of the spread of the virus? As I'd mentioned before, pandemics have and has always been at the root of cities. We see from as time immemorial, as far back as the medieval cities, that issues of whether it's pandemic or endemic. In fact, just to mention, the birth of urban planning is associated with issues of epidemics coming out of concentration of people in urban spaces. So issues of urban density, the clustering of people and services in a given area, certainly plays a role in the spread of the disease. We can agree to that. In addition, connectivity, how the spaces are connected, is also an important consideration. And with the advent of fast-moving trains, planes, and automobiles, cities across the world are more connected than they have been over the past 100 years. So you can get from Wuhan, China, in less than 24 hours. We go to New York on a regular basis. We can go to Miami for lunch, for breakfast, fly to New York for lunch, and head to London within the 24. Now, regardless of the size, cities are connected, and they are even more connected based on this global supply chain, this logistic hub that we have been experiencing in recent times. So you have more connectivity with urban spaces in Asia, Europe, and the Americas. Now, historically, if we look at the issue of urban density and connectivity, we'll see the connection between those two and pandemics. So if we go back as far as the what they call the Black Death or the plague, we see that the bubonic plague was spread through Europe, and at the time dense medieval port cities that were connected to Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. So historically, there is a connection between dense urban spaces and how the movement of people to those spaces. And so that's one example. Another example I submit to you is that of the Spanish flu in the early 1900s. We saw the spread. It's alleged that the spread of the flu resulted from soldiers returning from World War One to back to the United States through cities such as London and New York, to smaller towns and urban centers in the US. So there is some connection between connectivity, density, and urban spaces. But as I said before, not all densities are equal. So if we look at the city of Los Angeles, Los Angeles provide a good example of where neighborhoods that are dense, but people can shelter in space, work remotely, and have all the necessities addressed. On the other hand, if we were to look at communities in New York City, for example, and even here in Kingston, the Kingston metropolitan area, we see some very good examples of poor, dense places where people are forced to navigate between vehicular traffics on roadway, narrow or non-existent sidewalks, and are herded in commercial facilities to shop for their basic needs. So we see the densities of New York. This is actually Broadway, which is now, I understand, a ghost town. And of course, we see our own downtown Kingston. What we have to conclude then is that when you have the necessary basic services and proper systems of management, then as we can see in Los Angeles, where again the position, not all densities are equal, then it will address issues of spread of various diseases. Here's another example of issue of density and limited urban services in New York City, in Flatbush, which is very dense, very concentrated, concentration of particularly low-income individuals. And here again, coming out of work done by Richard Florida posited that there is a relationship between density and issues of economics and connectivity of the cities. And here we have an example of New York City, where it shows the concentration in dark purple. We have the highest concentration of the COVID virus individuals affected by the virus. These purple areas are dense communities, low-income communities, and for those of us who are familiar with New York, these communities are populated by persons of African, Latino, and Caribbean descent. Now, whilst the issue on density, and we see high density areas in low income, we are also mindful that, and in our current reality here in Jamaica, consideration of high density in a middle income residential community. So then the question becomes, okay, so because we are increasing densities throughout Kingston, and particularly in middle income communities, are we likely then to face similar pandemics in the future? And my response to that is yes. Yes. When we have insufficient public spaces, when we have limited consideration, because going forward, when we construct our public amenities, we have to now give consideration to 6 feet apart. And if you were to go to South Avenue or any of the new multifamily high-rise buildings going up, it is very difficult, I would submit to you, for you to realize the 6 feet apart, particularly in the public areas. So we have insufficient public open spaces, we have insufficient recreational amenities to support these high density development. So there is a cause for concern. What we do need to be able to address these concerns is effective urban management. I submit that it's with effective urban management that we would be able to address future pandemics. The opportunity now exists for housing developers, public policy makers to apply lessons that we have learned from this COVID situation, but also from past pandemics or epidemics as to how we deal with issues of density. We now have to redesign our towns and urban centers to reflect these concerns. And it's not just here in Jamaica, but it's throughout the Caribbean. We must give consideration to, first and foremost, I must emphasize this, we must give consideration to empirical data at the national, subnational, and local level. This data must be transparent and consistent with the purpose of respecting privacy and human rights obligation. Because we need to understand, if we're going to increase density, if we're going to use our land, limited resources as small island developing states in a particular approach, we now need to collect the data as to how persons are using the space, what are the limitations of the space, and how we can address those limitations. We also need to look at the redesign of our cities, towns, and urban centers in the Caribbean based on a global people-based definition of cities and human settlements, not one that is driven by the market approach for the provisions of goods and services. Which, as you know, and you would have been hearing the discussion in the US as to when they're going to open the commercial activities, without giving consideration to how the cities have been designed, how they have been laid out, how persons can access basic urban services, and the impact of persons of different economic strata. The rapid spread of the coronavirus brings into sharp focus challenges to how developing and developed countries must manage urbanization. One of the key challenges is how we rethink density management within the context of sustainable development and in light of historical occurrences of the pandemic. And on top of that, we have to layer the issue of natural and man-made diseases and other externalities associated with globalization and climate change. We must therefore use or employ modeling and projection that can disaggregate at the local level. Again, emphasis on data and the use of data to make certain prediction for how we use space and how we design space for the use. As I mentioned earlier, key to this is the role of the urban planners and land use managers. So Caribbean planners are at the forefront of this battle, or ought to be at the forefront. Unfortunately, in this current debate, I don't see them playing an active role, but we do need to play an active role because they are uniquely positioned to advocate and provide a strong voice for the resilience of sustainable, safe, and inclusive Caribbean cities that can withstand future pandemics. Urban planners and land use managers are trained, and we do it very well here at UTEC, to handle a variety of responsibility around planning, design, and management of land resources. So issues of transportation, issues of public green spaces. I can submit to you that had we had planners or land use managers advising the government about the limitations of movement or lockdown of St. Catherine, the results would have been a bit different and perhaps more palatable to the average Jamaican. The planners are able to assist the Caribbean region to meet the commitment of sustainable development goals because of their education and training. So we need to look broader. Yes, there is a health concern, but we notice that the health concern is layered on top of how we design and how we manage cities. So in closing, what are some of the opportunities that exist and the way forward for us? Professional training. I think that now, and here at the University of Technology, Jamaica, we have to look at our current curriculum. how do we now integrate issues of, say, health, education, and design of cities? We're doing that, but I think the opportunity is here now for us to expand on that. I think we also need to strengthen the capacity at the regional level. Yes, within the various Caribbean countries, the professional groups coming together to share best practices and to be able to expand on implementation of these best practices across the region. And where the government commitment and capacity and commitment to intervention in urban areas is limited, a point of entry would be to focus on the bottom up approach. One of the things that I have observed in terms of how we have been responding to this pandemic is the lack of the community-based organizations, those at the community level being brought to the table to respond to some of the basic community needs. So I think there is the opportunity there, and certainly urban planners and land use managers are well positioned to make this contribution. So the end is not near, and I want to thank you for your listening ears, and I'm prepared to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.